Thanks a lot for your question, but let me start with expressing gratitude that you correctly pronounce my surname. That's really a true achievement. So it's a true pleasure to be in one stage with true representatives of true allies, and we do really appreciate. Regarding security guarantees, now front line in Ukraine is also European front line and also transatlantic front line. I'm always repeating, I'm not tired to repeat, that Ukrainian security is indivisible with transatlantic security and indivisible with European security. So European guarantees, security guarantees for Ukraine equals to security guarantees for Europe. And we are the contributor of security, of European security. Now about peace talks. We conducted 2 rounds in Abu Dhabi in trilateral format. We are advancing and we are thankful to our American friends because without Trump it is unrealistic to end this war. American side, or under the American leadership, we could achieve progress, but in parallel we need to continue pressure on Russia. And we still have instruments, we must admit this leverage, and I agree with this assessment, no signs of willingness from Russian side for serious negotiations. On contrary, Ukrainian side has doable proposals. So what do we have now? Americans are in the process, that's great. Personally, Trump, under personal leadership of Trump, we have a chance to speed up our peace efforts, and Ukraine is ready with our doable proposals. Of course, no peace arrangements at the cost of our territorial integrity and sovereignty, but in any case, if we are talking about 20-point plan, still we have 3 points left for the level of leaders, and we have doable proposals. So next round, we do really hope that we will not get additional historical lectures. So it's not about process. Now it's a time for action, for acts, and for concrete, decisive steps.
Thank you. And Mr. Barrot, obviously you're leaving soon, so I'd ask you a question next. You know, we obviously, the Russian narrative likes to talk up Russia's gains on the battlefield and to create this sense that Russian, you know, success is inevitable. But the numbers tell a different story in terms of Russian casualties and the pressure on the Russian economy, and also what the Europeans, like France, has done in terms of the shadow fleet. Like, what other levers do you have to put pressure on Vladimir Putin and make him change his calculations when it comes to seriously negotiating and seriously needing a peace deal?
Well, first, you're right. Thanks to the courage of our Ukrainian friends and support of their allies and the Europeans in the front line, the special operation of Vladimir Putin is a total failure. What happened in recent weeks in Venezuela is what we call a special operations. But Vladimir Putin is still there, trying to achieve his maximalist colonial goals, but hitting into a heroic resistance by the Ukrainian people. And let us differentiate Vladimir Putin from the Russian nation. Vladimir Putin is ruining the Russian nation. He's caused, his war of aggression has caused north of 1 million casualties, which is more than all the losses of Russia and the Soviet Union since 1945. And there is now 1,000 Russian citizens dying on the front line. And in the meantime, the Russian economy is exhausted. Recession is forecast for 2026. Not only is Vladimir Putin ruining the great Russian nation, he's also taking the risk of making it exit history with a great age, you know? So what shall we do? We should stop this war, obviously, and we still have levers. with our allies and friends, and in particular with our British friends, we have gone very far into into blocking the Russian shadow fleet, not only by designating the vessels, but also in using our military means to prevent them from circulating throughout Europe. We have piled up, as far as the EU is concerned, 19 package of sanctions, and on the 24th of February, the 4th anniversary of the war, a 20th sanction package will come out that will be as powerful as the 18th and the 19th, precipitating the war industry of Vladimir Putin even further down. In the meantime, we're supporting Ukraine in its heroic resistance with this 90 billion loan that is going to shelter Ukraine from any financial difficulties in the 2 years to come. But now, thinking ahead and preparing for peace, we have put together, alongside with the UK and Germany and 30 other countries, the greatest coalition of all times to prepare for security guarantees that will be deployed once ceasefire is reached, in order for no aggression to be possible in the future of Ukraine. Because security guarantees for Ukraine are security guarantees for Europe. And beside the security guarantees that have been planified for 1 year by the coalition of the willing and that are ready to be deployed through the headquarters of the multilateral force Ukraine that is based in Paris, there is no alternative and credible security guarantees. So we are putting pressure on Russia. We're supporting Ukraine. We're preparing for peace and building, for the first time in our history outside of NATO, credible and robust security guarantees that will ensure, when times comes, that the aggression can never restart.
But do you realistically envisage a situation where Vladimir Putin agrees to a ceasefire deal that sees forces from NATO nations like France and the UK actually stationed in Ukraine without him having suffered significant pressure? Like, how is that realistic?
Well, if you don't have the kind of security guarantees that we have put together in close relationship with our Ukrainian partners, with the regeneration of the Ukrainian army, with military capacity that will be in a second layer on the ground, in the sea and in the air, a backstop that the US have expressed readiness to take into account when they were in Paris on January 6th, and some legal commitment binding everything together, there is no security guarantee. And if there is no security guarantee for Ukraine, there is no security guarantee for Europe. So there will be more and more pressure until not only Russia accepts to cease fire along the lines that Andrii mentioned, but also Russia accepting that we don't want this war to restart, and that for that we need security guarantees that have no aggressive dimension, that are only there to deter further aggression.
So actually, are you saying that Russia needs to make a deal now because it's only going to get worse?
That's my feeling. I think that time is playing against the Russian nation. Of course, Vladimir Putin is apparently ready to pay a very significant price, but it's to the detriment of the Russian nation. But yes, the losses are very high at the human level, but also at the economic level. And it is in the interest of the Russian people that Vladimir Putin stops right away.
Ms. Cooper, we're talking obviously about security guarantees. How confident are you that with all the planning that's gone into what the UK and France, Netherlands, other allies are going to be contributing to this security, peacekeeping, multinational force, that they actually have the capacity and the capability and the willingness to be able to defend the peace against battle-hardened Russian forces who understand existential war. They've waged a war of aggression for more than a decade now. How confident are you that that Europe has the ability to hold that line, given the underfunded militaries that we are currently left with since the end of the Cold War?
So let me start by just joining Jean-Noël, the tributes to Andrii, to President Zelensky and to the Ukrainian people for their huge courage and resilience in the face of 4 years of Russian aggression. And if ever there was evidence of the imbalance in the approach that's being taken now, you've seen Ukraine's commitment to peace, to the huge amount of work that has been underway with the US, but actually what we've seen from Putin is continued escalation of war. And what we've seen is the targeting of civilians and the targeting of energy infrastructure over the last few weeks, trying to plunge Ukrainian people into darkness and into cold at the worst of winter. That's families with small children, that is elderly people, as a result of Putin's targeting. And yet what we have seen is the most incredible resilience from Ukraine. And I would say I think that Putin at every stage has underestimated Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, and also underestimated the resolve of Ukraine's friends, because we know that Ukraine's security is our security. The reason that we have all been there with the support for the military support throughout the last few years, but also support for things like the energy infrastructure, is because we know that this is a threat not just to Ukraine's future, but to the future of Europe, to the future of all of us. And it's good to be sitting here with Jean-Noël, because obviously the work that Keir Starmer and President Macron have done as part of leading the coalition of the willing has been about showing you had 39 countries coming together with President Zelensky, with President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer to come together around that Paris Declaration. And I think that was a very strong commitment to the security of Ukraine and to security guarantees. Now, yes, there is an issue right across Europe that we are stepping up. We know that right across Europe we need to invest more in defence. That is the commitment we have made in the UK. That is the commitment that countries right across Europe have made. But alongside that additional investment, which is about our long-term future, even with peace, the peace that we want to see in Ukraine, there is still a long-term issue about needing to make sure that Europe can increase its defence and its resilience as well, and all of us are part of that. But I would say, just in terms of the security guarantees, the whole point about the multi-layered security guarantees that everyone has been involved in drawing up, that where there has been extensive military planning still, is all about ensuring that layered commitment to the ceasefire and monitoring, to the support for Ukraine's armed forces, to the multilateral force Ukraine that UK and France have both committed to supporting, and other countries have said they want to support as well, as part of this wider security guarantees, and then this binding commitment if Russia attacks again. The reason this is so important is because I don't think you can get to peace without that, because you need that Ukraine needs the security of knowing that this is not just a pause for Putin to rearm and then come again, because that does not deliver a just and lasting peace. It does not deliver security for anyone. So therefore we need, in order to get to the peace agreement in the first place, we need that. But the other thing we need is the much greater pressure on Putin and on the Russian regime as well, because I think you said it, Deborah, earlier on, that the evidence, I'm hugely sceptical that President Putin is committed to peace. I really hope that these talks can make progress and can get to a peace agreement, but I still think we are going to need to keep intensifying that economic pressure on Russia, including tightening the chokehold on oil and gas, tightening the chokehold on the Russian shadow fleet, keeping up that economic pressure with additional sanctions, and I hope to a maritime services ban as well, so we keep ramping up the pressure on Russia's economy. Their economy has already been heavily hit, but we need to keep that pressure up further.
So can we expect to see British forces boarding a Russian-linked shadow fleet vessel in the near future?
Well, we've already provided support where it's been needed.
That's us doing it.
We've already been providing support where it is needed for action against the Russian shadow fleet, and we will continue to do so. We will continue to look at what are the best and most effective ways, including our role as part of that process, to make sure we can maintain that pressure and take action against the shadow fleet. So
that's not a no.
It's that we will look continually at every opportunity that we can to put pressure on the shadow fleet.
Mr. Van Weel, we've obviously talked about what the Europeans are thinking in terms of this coalition of the willing, but the elephant in the room, of course, is the American backstop, the US security guarantees. Like, how important are they for this proposal to be credible, or could the Europeans do it on their own if, given we've had all this friction with that transatlantic relationship, if it does all really blow up badly?
Well, first of all, let me echo the others in saying that the bravery of Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, and you in person as well, Andrii, in keeping this Russian aggression off at a distance for 4 years is really admirable. And I think that over the past 4 years, and let me be very open and frank here, we've probably been slow in coming to your rescue. We've been deterring ourselves at different stages throughout the conflict. And probably that has been an unnecessary self-deterrence. With every next step that we've taken, we've seen that we haven't escalated this war. No, we've put more pressure on President Putin. And that's exactly what we should keep doing in order to bring him to the negotiating table in a serious manner. And that also goes for the situation post-war or post-ceasefire. Also there, we shouldn't be afraid. You were asking, will Putin allow any NATO troops on Ukrainian territory? Well, it's in the last 2 words, it's Ukrainian territory. So I don't think we should give Putin the veto on what we do or what we don't do. That hasn't helped us in this war. It hasn't helped Ukraine. Supporting Ukraine more has helped in the war, and it will in the post-war situation as well. So I think, yes, we should do the maximum to help Ukraine defend itself, also in a post-war situation. That is, of course, the best deterrence ever, and we have a very credible and battle-hardened force in Ukraine now that is actually able to provide its own security to a large extent. 2, we need to show that we are committed to Ukraine's security for the long haul, and that's where the coalition of the willing comes in my view. And 3, yes, we also need to be realistic. There is no such power in this world as American power. We see that now in conflicts that have to be resolved around the world. Without US involvement and pressure, it won't work. Without US aid to our defense in a NATO context, European security is not what it is today. So with all the trials and tribulations that we're having in our transatlantic bond, and I won't deny that there are some, above all should be our aim to keep this transatlantic bond, to keep the US involved in Europe, because it's also in the US interest, but also to keep the US involved in Ukraine, because that's also in the US interest.
I mean, you made that really important point about how Ukraine should be deciding who is and isn't in its country. And similarly, should that apply to NATO membership? Should that still be on the table as part of these peace negotiations?
Well, nobody's taken it off the table, but we have all concluded that...
I think Donald Trump did, didn't he?
At this point in time, there's no consensus to move forward on this. And also, it's not the immediate step towards ending this war. So for the time being, I think the steps that we're taking, serious negotiations, pressure on Putin, providing credible security guarantees that go a very long way into seriousness and detail, I think is the way to end this war for now.
Thank you. And Ms. Shaheen, can you just offer your view on the American position? And are you worried that that Donald Trump, who obviously is is pushing for a peace deal, he wants to be able to say that he's managed to negotiate these 2 sides, and it's absolutely right what Minister Sybiha said, that we wouldn't be in this situation had it not been for the pressure from the Trump administration on the 2 sides to get talking. But are you you worried that that desire for an outcome could lead to the American side putting undue pressure on the Ukrainians to accept a deal that is not in Ukraine's favour, including giving up the whole of the Donbass, and without doing that American security guarantees won't be forthcoming?
Well, I am worried, like I assume everybody here is worried about what the outcome of any peace agreement would be. And we have a very large bipartisan delegation here from the Senate mostly, but also from the House. We're having this little funding issue in the U.S., which you may be following, that's keeping many of our House members away. But we are here because we support Ukraine. I would echo, as I'm sure everyone would, all of the comments of the panelists here about the importance of what Ukraine has done, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe, for democracies around the world. And I want to make sure that whatever outcome happens, it's one that Ukrainians are comfortable with, and one that ensures that Vladimir Putin and Russia are not going to reinvade Ukraine or any other NATO country or any other European country for that matter. And I think I applaud Donald Trump for, and I'm not a member of his party, but I applaud the effort to get the parties to the table. But the United States and this Trump administration should have put much more pressure, should be putting more pressure on Vladimir Putin. We have legislation in the Senate with 85 co-sponsors that would put severe secondary sanctions on those countries that do business with Russia. We need to pass that. We need to ensure that there is a price to pay for supporting Russia's war machine. I serve as the top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We've passed out in recent weeks 4 pieces of legislation that should send a message to Russia about how elected officials in the United States are feeling. One would designate Russia a state sponsor of terrorism for its kidnapping of Ukrainian children. Should never be allowed in the free world to say that that's acceptable, and Russia needs to pay a price for that. It would sanction Chinese companies that are supporting Russia's war machine. It would allow us in the United States to use the seized assets from Russia to support Ukraine. And Congress has just passed an appropriations bill that provides $400 million in funding that was not requested by the Trump administration, but that Congress put in because we thought it was important, and significant funding for continued intelligence efforts, intelligence sharing with Ukraine. So the support is there in the United States. We need to make sure it continues. And as you pointed out so well, it's, as did everyone, this is not just about European security. This is about America's security. And we know that the person who is watching as closely as Vladimir Putin what happens in Ukraine is President Xi in China. And if he thinks that the West is going to walk away from Ukraine, he is absolutely sure we're going to walk away from Taiwan, and we're not going to defend the Indo-Pacific. And meeting with officials from the Indo-Pacific about their concerns, they are very real. And so what we're doing in supporting Ukraine is ensuring that we send a message to dictators around the world that the free world is not going to accept what they're doing.
This is my last question before I open up the floor, so get thinking about the questions you'd like to ask. And just one more time for Mr. Sybiha. Your defence minister at the NATO meeting, well, it was the Ukraine contact group meeting after the NATO meeting in Brussels yesterday, he talked, well, I asked him about the impact of that decision by Elon Musk and his Starlink company to switch off those Starlink systems that the Russians have been using on Ukrainian territory to attack Ukraine, and he sort of signalled that what effect that was having on Russian operations, and he signalled it was having a pretty significant effect, and that Ukraine has more asymmetric tricks up its sleeves. Last year, Donald Trump infamously told your president that Ukraine doesn't have the cards. Do you think now, actually, Ukraine is increasingly having a pretty healthy stack of cards, and actually you could be changing Donald Trump's impression of Ukraine's chances, and that could change the whole dynamic when it comes to this negotiation process?
I can't demonstrate you cards because I didn't take them with me, but we definitely have realistic arguments and really very effective arguments. But let me also react on your question regarding security guarantees. What is important? Legal nature of future security guarantees, strength of security guarantees, and sequencing. So if we are talking about legal nature of security guarantees, we got confirmation from American side that they are ready to ratify them in the Congress. That's fundamental for us, and probably we have almost ready draft of bilateral security guarantees, not assurances, first time ever in our history. So that's the first element, obligatory binding security guarantees. Also, if we are talking about multilateral format, in the format of coalition of willing. Second point, boots on the ground. Yes, American side told us directly that they are not ready to deploy troops on the ground, and we understand this. They have another means how to support us or how to provide security to us. But boots on the ground with American backstop, that's also fundamental second element of future security architecture. Personally, I do not believe in any effective security architecture in Europe without American backstop. And after these talks in Abu Dhabi, we have more clarity. What does it mean, American backstop?
What does it mean?
I will explain later. Third point, our EU membership. It is also for us an element of security guarantees. Strengths, similar to the Article 5 of Washington Treaty, and the last, the most important and crucial point, strong Ukrainian army, deterrence package, our self-sufficiency, our deterrence package, our long-range capacities, our capacities to produce air defense systems with the capacity to shoot down ballistic missiles. So, and sequencing. It is really very difficult or even unrealistic to imagine any progress in peace efforts without clarity, without certainty, without clear understanding of these packages of security guarantees. So we need to finalize this process, I mean peace process, inevitably. So security guarantees is an inevitable element of peace process. And one more remark regarding possible strong steps. We are expecting the approval of the next 20th package of sanctions. It will be really strong and harmful, but we must exhaust the Russian economy, and we must exhaust Russian military capacities. Or the best way, both economy and military capacities. And we still have, you see, potential. Why? For example, American side has imposed sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil. And we do really hope that our European allies also will impose sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil. And additionally, probably it's a proper time to forbid and to issue visas for the participants of Russian aggression, I mean Russian soldiers and families of these soldiers, to ban possibility for them to visit Europe, to visit Canada, to visit America. It will be really harmful for them.
You just talked, just finally, sorry, you mentioned the importance of the US backstop. Does that mean needing that the US security guarantees mean that Ukraine would bow to pressure to give up territory, give up the whole of the Donbass, or even accelerate elections in order to ensure that you lock in that American support?
See, I mentioned at the beginning that Ukraine will never accept any formula, any initiative at the cost of our territorial integrity and sovereignty. The recipe is very simple. Engagement and leadership of the USA to raise the price of further aggression to Russia, personally to Putin, personally to his regime. Here we have sanctions, here we have isolation, and here we have frozen assets. And third point, deterrence package for us, and to strengthen our capacities, our defense industry, our army. Putin must understand consequences of not being constructive. Russians must understand consequences, blackouts, our deep strikes, asymmetric approach about which you asked us. Of course, we must apply such an approach, asymmetric approach, to achieve our goals. Because Putin, he didn't achieve any strategic goal in Ukraine, and he must admit that he will never achieve strategic goals in military goals in Ukraine. Why he is attacking our energy grid, our energy system? Because he wants to decrease, to break the mood of our people, morale of our people. He wants to give the signal. If you not accept my ultimatum, if you not accept my demands, I will escalate. He attacked by Oreshnik last time. First time invest in Ukraine, our underground gas storages. So it was also a signal. It was very close to the NATO border. It was an attack on the minds of so-called West.
Thank you. Right, so people, we had that at the back there, very quick with the arm. If you could introduce yourself and then direct the question to the person you want to answer it.
Mainly to Yvette Cooper, Charles Grant from the Centre for European Reform. We've talked a lot about security guarantees, but when I was in Berlin recently, I met a lot of scepticism about the reassurance force and the security guarantees. I was told, is Putin going to be deterred by one British brigade and one French brigade? Probably not. The only people who can do the fighting is the Ukrainians. So make Ukraine strong by all means, but don't pretend these security guarantees are serious. And the Germans are not sending any soldiers to them. So can Yvette Cooper convince us that the security guarantees are really strong enough to do anything to deter Putin?
Thank you. So maybe for you, Yvette.
So I think the security guarantees are a whole package. There's not just one little bit of the security guarantees. The security guarantees is a whole package that includes ceasefire monitoring, includes the support for the Ukrainian armed forces, which I think all of us have said. It's the support for the Ukrainian armed forces that is the most crucial part of this, and also the willingness for other countries to provide a multilateral force Ukraine in order to be able to support Ukrainian forces, whether that be also through issues around training and equipment as well, and crucially the binding guarantees if there is a further Russian attack. So all of these things together, it's what European countries as part of the coalition of the willing have been talking to the US about. It's what SACEUR has been involved in discussions, military planning as well. Of course, it is a package of different dimensions, but I think the importance of it is also what it says about the broad-based commitment to continuing to support Ukraine. It'll only work if it's also balanced with that continued economic pressure, the continued international economic pressure as well. But it shows, I think, the extent of the security commitment to keep supporting Ukraine.
Can I just add a few words to that? The idea of the coalition of the willing is not to put forces into Ukraine that are then going to defend against an attacking Russian army. So it's not about dimensions of forces necessarily that have to provide the credibility of security guarantees. The idea is that we have a ceasefire, that we have an arrangement about monitoring this ceasefire, monitoring any troop builds up. At the same time, we do all the efforts that Secretary Cooper just mentioned. So it's more than a numbers game involved in the whole comprehensive package of these security guarantees.
And you have to wonder, I remember, as I'm sure everyone here does, when Russia invaded Crimea. And there were calls in Congress for long-range weapons. There were calls in Ukraine and among some in Europe to give Ukraine the help it needed at that time. And for whatever reasons, the parties decided not to do that. And so now we're here again. And so I think in order to actually get a peace deal, there have to be security guarantees that everybody is comfortable with. Otherwise, we're going to be here again in 5 or 10 years, and Russia's going to be invading again. If not the rest of Ukraine, whatever the peace deal has, a NATO country, the Baltics, Poland, I don't know where, but that's the concern.
Thank you. We're going to run over a little bit because we started late. The lady there.
Yes. I'm Trudy Rubin, World Affairs columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Mr. Sybiha, Minister Sybiha, do you have confidence in security guarantees that don't have European boots on the ground? Why should Putin be afraid if he can attack first, as in Crimea, and everybody is worrying afterwards? And would there have to be enough troops so that it wouldn't just be like a small presence like at Srebrenica?
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this question. Probably I mentioned earlier that boots on the ground is an essential part of future security guarantees, also because of business opportunities. If we have boots on the ground, it's also a deterrence and also a guarantee for future investors, and it's also an element of encouraging them to invest in Ukraine. So we have also confirmation from some European capitals, and not only European capitals, regarding their readiness to deploy troops on the ground. Yes, probably they will be not close to the front line. Yes, it will be after the ceasefire. That's true. I don't know if we are talking about the mandate of peacekeepers or peace monitoring group. I don't know, because it is still in the process. But we need this presence in Ukraine. Also in future, Ukraine is ready to deploy its military forces in another geographies.
The gentleman there, and if we could take the lady here as well, just to accelerate the process.
Yes, thank you so much. Bob Dane from the Klingendahl Institute from the Netherlands. I've had the pleasure or problem to have to monitor Russian compliance with ceasefires before, both in Georgia and in Ukraine. And if there's a couple of things we know is that, one, Russia generally doesn't act in good faith. Second, it's very comfortable in the gray zone, very good at provocations and causing a lot of confusion. And third, once there is a ceasefire, the parties that negotiated it tend to want it to hold, even if there's evidence to the contrary. We also know that there's one of the longest front lines in history, over 1,000 kilometers. Complex terrain, urban terrain, forests.
Question, please.
The Americans will monitor it. How will you govern that ceasefire if there is violations? How will you get that data? And if it's only the Americans that have it, how will the Europeans act on it? Thank you.
Thank you. And the lady here?
Thank you so much. From the Ukrainian Europe Center. We hear some voices in the European Union, in Europe right now, to re-establish or relaunch a dialogue with Russia. So what is the reason for that? Is that the fear that the US has its own channel of communication with Russia and Kremlin, and maybe it's finally the time to provide Ukraine with long-range capabilities, which is crucial for security guarantees for Ukraine?
Okay, so Ms. Cooper, do you want to answer the question about the monitoring, and then do you want to answer the question about the EU and interactions with Russia?
So look, Brigitte, obviously there has to be effective monitoring and compliance. You're right to say that we have experience in previous conflicts of violations, but it's exactly because of the violations that you have to have an effective ceasefire monitoring process that is drawn up as part of the security guarantees. And I think it's hugely important that the US is so committed to that process as part of the wider security guarantees. I suppose the thing that I would add to the reflections on this is we are also very well aware, I think, right across Europe, that the aggression from Russia is not going away, and that this is taking many different forms now. There are many different kinds of hybrid threats, of cyber threats, of the sort of the misinformation and election manipulation threats, sabotage threats, the different kinds of threats that we are seeing. So we know that that is not going away across Europe, whatever the next steps are in terms of the peace process for Ukraine, and that remains the case for Ukraine as well. And that is why I think for all of our countries, and is something that we discuss also as part of the NATO alliance as well, is taking ever more seriously the kinds of hybrid and cyber threats and so on we face, and recognising that alongside the defence and military capabilities that we need to continue to invest more in, what we also need to do is to strengthen our response to hybrid threats and challenges as well.
Can I add one thing to your list of hybrid threats, and that's disinformation, because we're seeing huge examples of that in the United States. I know we're seeing them in other places around the world, and we don't have an adequate response to how to address those, and it's very challenging.
And do you want to ask about that question about Russia? And sort of the European nations maybe thinking about reconnecting with Russia?
So in the end, Russia will remain in the current location where it is, and that's very close to Europe. So I'm not saying that we will not have any connections to Russia indefinitely. We have chosen, after the full-scale invasion, to cut our ties because there was no sense in talking to Russia at that point in time, and I believe there still is no sense in talking to Russia at this point in time. At this moment, I think the worst we can do is to provide President Putin with an alternative route to the route that we all want him to take, which is to come to the negotiating table under maximum pressure from the US. And I fully agree with the senator that we have to applaud President Trump in bringing about the talks that are now ongoing. Let's not offer Putin any off-ramps, any alternatives, any ways to weasel out of the pressure that he's certainly feeling. Let's increase the pressure, stay united as we have done over the past 4 years. And on that note, let me apologize for running off now for joining a meeting with President Zelensky.
No problem at all. Yeah, I was saying we've run over. But thank you ever so much. If you could give my panel a round of applause, please. Thank you. Nice.